instance, I'm hearing a lot of, it's not very believable, or it's interesting. So talk about what makes it interesting, what makes it believable or not believable. Try to answer some more of those questions and get more detailed. But other than that, very good job. So have the students arrived yet? No, great. Hi, everyone.
The bus was late.
No, we didn't have keys.
Your notes? Okay.
All right, well, welcome back. I was just going over what everyone else has written for plot. Do you have any of your paragraphs to share for plot?
You got yours now? You're supposed to bring your stuff.
Yeah, I did school. I did home. I went to school.
Well, you're supposed to bring it home, so you put it in the bag.
Mine was home. I was here.
Haley, maybe you could read yours?
I just found my phone.
Okay. I'll read.
I like this book because it was interesting. I like this book because it was interesting, but I don't think it was believable because all the people was made up, and all of the it was interesting because there was a lot of action in it.
Very good. Okay, so that is a good example because you have gone and elaborated on what makes it not believable, what makes it interesting. So that's a very good way of doing that. Great. So now that we've talked about setting and plot and you've done those paragraphs, we are going to talk about character. So let's start off with what makes a good book. What do you guys think? What makes a good book? What is the most important thing to make a good book?
A good plot.
A good plot? So you think it's a good plot? What else? Does anyone else have a different idea? What do you think makes a good book?
I think that the characters makes a good book.
The characters make a good book? Well, yeah, I see a lot of different ways. Someone thinks that it's a plot, someone thinks it's a character, someone else might think it's a setting. And the thing is that all of these things work together. If you imagine a book that had amazing characters, but a really bad plot, it wouldn't be interesting to read. If you imagine a book that has a great plot, but a really boring setting, it might take that edge off it. And if you imagine a wonderful plot, but with bad characters, again, it would take off that edge. It would make it less interesting. So a good book is one where all of these elements are working together. So we've already talked about plot and setting. Now we're going to be talking about character. Now, I think that it can be universally agreed that, I think it can be universally agreed that a book with better characters is a better book than one with boring characters. That's probably always true. Now, let's start off with what is a character. Would anyone like to tell me what is a character?
The people in the book, like there's main characters and just other characters.
Yeah, exactly. The people in the book. So there's the main character, there's the other characters. So a character is the person in the book. It might be an animal as well. Have any of you read books with animals as characters?
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably have. So some examples of books with animals as characters: Redwall, The Chronicles of Narnia has a lot of talking animals. There are some books that have only animals as characters. So you can think of characters as the people and the animals in the stories. Now, a character is the person or creature portrayed in a story. Some examples would be Captain Jack Sparrow, Voldemort, Hobbes, Calvin, Willy Wonka, Hermione Granger. These are all different examples of characters. What are some characters you can name?
Books you've read. Characters.
Phone Bone.
I'm sorry?
Phone Bone.
Foam Bone?
Phone Bone. Speaking to the mic, guys.
Yes. That's his name.
That's in the Bone series.
Oh, okay. I was thinking that's kind of an odd name. I wouldn't like walk down the street and meet someone named that. But yeah, very good. Okay, so I'll be character. What is another example of a character? exactly. That's a very famous character. And the thing with characters is sometimes characters can kind of become celebrities when you get people like Harry Potter that become kind of really famous in their own right as fictional characters. And that's when you know you've got a really good character that people can relate to. Now, here's a maybe hard question. What is a protagonist? Any ideas? What is a protagonist?
Not really sure.
Not really sure. Well, a protagonist is a fancy word for main character. So a main character, yeah. And this is a good one to know. And you might just be thinking, well, why don't we just say main character? Well, protagonist is the one that's used quite a bit when you're talking about, literary stuff and characters. You would often say protagonist, antagonist. And so a protagonist is the main character. If the protagonist is the main character, what do you think an antagonist would be?
The other characters.
Well, an antagonist is a different character, but more specifically, an antagonist is kind of the villain in the story. So, for instance, Harry Potter is the protagonist in Harry Potter. Voldemort would be the antagonist. So, in your story, if you think of it as kind of pro, so the good person, anti or antagonist, that would be the person who's against the protagonist. So, if you think in your story, who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist?
Good guy, bad guy.
The rat creatures the Bone Bone and his cousins are the protagonists, and I'm not sure,
The antagonist would be
and
the villain.
is the rat creatures.
Okay, so the
Rat creature.
rat creatures are the antagonists. So, Foam Bone and his cousins are the... I keep on laughing at that name. Sorry. So he is the protagonist, the main character, and then the people who are working against him would be the antagonists, or the villains, the bad guys in the story. As your teacher said, good guy, bad guy. It's exactly like that. So, who are some of your favorite protagonists? Would anyone like to give me an example?
Miley.
Miley?
Smiley.
Smiley. Okay, Smiley. Very good. So Smiley might be an example of protagonist. Who are some other favorite protagonists?
What was in your book?
Robin.
Robin.
Which book?
Change of Heart.
Change of Heart.
Okay, great.
Robin.
So protagonists, we see them pretty much in every book we read. Every book will have a main character. It's the person who the story is focused on, and that person is the protagonist. And you might think of some of your favorite protagonists, your least favorite protagonists. Now, an antagonist, or the villain, is the person who gets in the protagonist's way. So some famous examples of antagonists might be Voldemort. There are lots of antagonists in pretty much all the stories we read, because why do you think the stories would have antagonists in them?
Because they're part of the problem.
Because they're part of the problem. Very good. Every story, or at least mostly every story, needs to have a conflict. That problem, or that argument, that disagreement, that escape, or whatever the conflict in your story is, it's often caused by some sort of antagonist. The antagonist is the person or creature who gets in the protagonist's way, says, no, you can't do that, I'm going to do this to you, or whatever. So it's important to look at your story and say, who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist. Also, you could ask yourself, what is the antagonist doing to try to stop the protagonist? So, for instance, if I were to make myself a blank page here, let's think of a story that we can map out. How about, what's a good story we can find the protagonist, antagonist for?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, yeah, that's a very good one. Okay, great. So we have Lord of the Rings. Does anyone want to tell me who the protagonist is?
Frodo.
Frodo, very good. So he is the main
orcs.
Yeah, well, that's one of the antagonists. Very good. So there are the orcs. And there's actually a bunch of antagonists. What are some other antagonists?
The Precious.
I'm sorry?
The Precious?
Gollum. Or the Ring is kind of, it's sort of the antagonist in a way. So you have Gollum, you have the Ring. So how might the Ring be an antagonist?
Because it sent all kinds of people. It starts all kinds of wars. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big source of conflict. And what's more, I don't know if you guys have read the entire series, but you'll see as the books go on that whoever carries the ring, it becomes quite a burden. It becomes really heavy, and it's a big burden to have to carry the ring. So you have the orcs, you have Gollum, you have the ring. Any other antagonists?
That weird guy that the girl kills in the end. The guy who can't be killed by a man.
I'm trying to think who you're talking
That
about.
king. That king.
Shoot, I'm trying to think of what you're talking. I mean, like I know. What is that?
He said he can't be killed by a man, and then the girl goes over and kills him.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. I can't be killed by a man. Okay, so, yeah. Well, since we can't think of his name at the moment, I guess this is pretty good. Now, so for each one of these, we want to think about how it's connected to Frodo. So, what is the conflict? What is the conflict between Frodo and the orcs? Why don't these guys like each other?
Because they don't like each other because they're in a war over the ring, but they don't know that Frodo has it.
Okay, and I mean the orcs are like trying to kill him too, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be a pretty obvious conflict. So there's a war going on, and also the orcs are trying to kill Frodo. So that's kind of why they don't like each other. And then we look at Gollum. What is Frodo's problem with Gollum? Or Gollum's
Frodo likes Gollum, but Sam doesn't.
Yeah.
Sam is another good.
That's very true, because they do kind of try to help Gollum, right? Because they take him along with them and treat him okay. So Gollum has kind of more of an issue with the ring because he's the Precious, basically, because he really wants it and he can't get his hands on it pretty much. So yeah, I guess he has more of a issue. And yeah, you brought up another good point. So what would Sam be in the book?
He would be one of the good characters.
Yeah, he's a good character. So Sam is one of the people that we call a supporting character. So supporting characters help out the main character, and they also kind of fight against the antagonist. So who are some of the supporting characters, other than Sam?
Aragorn.
Aragorn.
And Gimli.
And who else?
Gimli.
I'm sorry.
The dwarf.
Oh yeah, right.
Gimli.
Very good. Okay. Who else?
And Legolas.
Sorry.
Legolas.
Oh
Legolas.
yeah, that's right. He's the elf.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm hoping I know how to spell it. Do you guys remember how I misspelled beauty the other time? That was probably the most embarrassing moment in my life. Okay. And one more supporting character.
Gandalf.
Yeah, Gandalf. Very good. So, this is getting pretty detailed, but when you look at something like The Lord of the Rings, which is a giant series and has lots of complex relationships in it, then you can still boil it down to a few things. You know that there's the protagonist, so Frodo, he's the protagonist, he's the main character, the good person. Then each protagonist will have their supporting characters, people like Sam, Aragorn, Gimlet, or is it Gimlet or
Gimli.
Oh, Gimli.
Gimli.
Okay, Gimli, right. What's the problem with these names? can't say them out loud. Legolas and Gandalf. Okay. So those are the supporting characters right there. And then you have your nasty antagonists, the people who are in a conflict basically with the protagonist. So that is kind of the way that you want to look at your story, whether it's a 39 Clues or the Book Thief or whatever story that you're doing. Then you want to say who's the main character, who's the villain, who's the supporting characters, who are the supporting characters, and make a nice diagram. Or just do it. So can you think of another word for antagonist?
Bad guy.
Bad guy, yeah, exactly. So the antagonists, there are actually quite a few words. You could think of them as the villain, the bad guy, the person who's trying to stop your protagonist. Whatever you think of, just remember the protagonist, good, antagonist, bad. Or that might be a little simplified, but you can think of it along those lines. Now, antagonists, though, can be quite complex. They're not necessarily evil. Some antagonists are pure evil, like, for instance, Voldemort. While other antagonists are just people or creatures who make life difficult for the protagonist, they create conflict. So have you ever seen some antagonists in a story who maybe aren't super evil, but they're just annoying?
Precious.
Okay. What are some other ones?
Gollum.
Gollum? Yeah. Because Gollum isn't, like, super evil. He's just kind of addicted to the ring and also a little bit creepy looking. But other than that, yeah, he's annoying and he's needy and dependent, but yeah, he's not like super evil. What else? Who are some other antagonists? He doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings, but just someone who's annoying, not necessarily evil.
Renoma, what's her name? Clearly, Ramona.
Oh, Ramona. Yeah, actually, I think she's the main character, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the main character, Ramona. But that's actually a good book to look at because in Ramona you have all these characters and no one's like evil in Ramona. You don't have good versus evil there, but you do have sometimes she and her sister don't get along, and so you look at that kind of relationship. And so sometimes like family members can be antagonists, especially in the 39 Clues. That's a good example for family members being antagonists. But there are antagonists really everywhere. You look at your own family for antagonists. My sister is sometimes my friend. If my life were a story, my sister would be kind of both the supporting character and the antagonist because my sister is sometimes my friend, but she also tries to stop me from doing things sometimes. So who are some of your favorite antagonists? Who are your favorite antagonists?
The Precious.
The Precious.
Number books.
What are some other favorite antagonists?
The Rat Creatures.
The rat creatures. Great. What else?
The bad lady and the Little Mermaid.
The bad lady in The Little Mermaid? What was that?
Ursula.
Ursula.
Oh, Ursula. Yeah. I was about to say I don't remember bad lady. Okay, yeah, so Ursula. What are some other favorite antagonists?
The Crab Creatures.
What?
Crab creatures.
Forget the
and-
whole story. I forget it.
Well, that's okay. So you can find antagonists in pretty much anything that has a storyline, whether it is a book or a movie. What are some antagonists in movies?
Bad guy.
Joker.
The Joker.
In
Yeah,
Batman?
In Batman. Yeah, that would definitely be an antagonist. So we can find antagonists in all kinds of places. And ask yourself, who is the antagonist in my book? Now, moving on, why do you like the antagonist? So, for those of you who told me your favorite antagonists, why do you think you like them?
They're interesting.
They're interesting. So you have a really important thing there. Interest. So what do you think makes a character interesting? What do you think makes that antagonist interesting?
Their evil laugh.
antagonist, and it might be because they are actually genuinely likable. There are some antagonists in stories that you grow to like, almost like personally, but it could also be because of some kind of personality trait, like an evil laugh, or it could be because you sympathize with them. There are lots of reasons why you might like an antagonist, even though they're the bad guys. Now, let's take a moment to read this strip from Calvin and Hobbes, the book that I'm doing. Now, here's Calvin.
I need a room.
I'm sorry?
Sorry. It's okay.
Oh yeah, so if we take a look at this strip, then you have Calvin saying, our fortress is completely indestructible. So he's building this big snow fort. And then Hobbes is just looking on. Then Hobbes is reading the newspaper, the weather report, and it says, sunny and warmer today, high in the upper 30s. Why might this not be the news Calvin wants to hear?
Because he can't go outside.
Well,
Because
Snow.
yeah, well, exactly, because his fort. So, see his fort, he's just built it up, he has all the snow in here, and he says, there, our fortress is completely indestructible, so there's no way it's coming down. Yeah, but then he hears this weather report. It's going to be sunny, it's going to be in the upper 30s, which means that his fort might melt. So Calvin is very mad, and he shouts, and you kind of see it's getting shorter. He shouts, our snow fort is impenetrable. Anyone know what impenetrable means?
Unbreakable. And you can't come in.
Yeah, you can't come in. There's no way you could penetrate it. There's no way you can get through it. So now he shouts, at the slightest provocation, we will let loose a merciless barrage of stinging ice. So he has a snowball cupped in his hand like he's ready to throw. And then he says, none dare attack us, we rule all. Together, a veritable fist of defiance, we stand immune to any onslaught. So he's shouting, he's making these declarations, we're so invincible, no one's going to come through, and all this stuff. We are invincible. And you see Hobbes over here with this little smirk on his face, and then Calvin gets hit in the face with a snowball from his pet tiger. So that's a little comic strip. Now, what is the conflict in this strip?
They're not going to be able to go back out into their fort.
Well, yeah, Calvin is mad because his fort is going to melt. He can't do anything about it. And so he is just shouting. He's saying that it's invincible when really he's really kind of mad that his snow fort is going to melt. And then you see over here that Hobbes is preparing to throw a snowball in Calvin's face, kind of to disprove everything he said or something. So what would Calvin and Hobbes be like without Calvin and Hobbes? If you think of this strip and you don't have Calvin, you don't have all the stuff he's saying, it would just be a snow fort that is melting. And that wouldn't be a very interesting strip. So that's why characters are so important. Characters add life to a story. If you think of Calvin and Hobbes, the comic strip, without these two, it wouldn't really be anything you'd want to read. It would just be watching the snow fort melt. So how do the characters in the story you chose contribute to the enjoyment of your story?
They make it funny at the end when they screw up the cow race so they would have to do the dishes for the rest of their life.
Okay, so they make it funny at the end when they screw up. So you might think because of the mistakes the characters make. And that's quite normal, actually, for characters to be making mistakes. You see that happen in stories. So, for example, you could write about what made the characters meaningful. You could say they had this perspective. You could say what made the characters funny. They messed up. And when you write a response to literature, it's important to include your thoughts on the story's characters. Were they realistic? Were they entertaining? Were they eccentric, cool, unrealistic, lovable, boring? What made your characters special or not so special? What was a big trait that your character had? Be sure to think about that sort of thing.
They weren't very smart.
They weren't very smart. Yeah, you could write about that. So let's take a look at what we've done so far. At this point, you should have your paragraph number 1 with your hook. So everyone has their hook asking a question or making a scenario. I'm hoping. Brief summary of the book at the beginning in this paragraph number 1. And the statement of intent. So for instance, imagine living in so-and-so. So this would be an example of a scenario as a hook. A brief summary. The story is blank, 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 this happens. And statement of intent. So this book is high literature because, or something like that, saying I am going to defend this book, I love this book, or whatever. So that would be your paragraph number 1 with your hook, your brief summary, your statement of intent. Paragraph number 2 would have thoughts on the book's setting. So that's what we talked about in our second conference. We were talking about our setting. Paragraph number 3 is thoughts on the book's plot. So does everyone have all this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very good to hear. Now, in paragraph number 4, any guesses what we'll be talking about?
The characters.
The characters, exactly. That's why we've been talking so much about them. In paragraph number 4, we'll share our thoughts on the book's characters. Were they sympathetic? Did we like them? Were they irritating? Did we love them? How did we feel about the book's characters? So sometimes it's rough being a kid, I think, because a lot of decisions get made for you. But when you write a response to literature, you get to decide, did I like this character? Why or why not? And share that with the rest of the world. When you write a response to literature, you're the one in charge, and you decide whether or not the author did a good job. So to get started, ask some questions. Here is an example person/character chart. So filling out this kind of chart gives you a clear look at a character in a piece of writing. So that's a great source. So first think of the name. So let's think of the name of a character. Who's a famous character? Let's do Harry Potter. Okay, this is an example. So name Harry Potter. Age. Well, his age changes throughout the book, so his age is between 11 to 17 throughout the books. Appearance. What are some appearance traits of Harry Potter?
He has lightning bolt scar.
Very good. He has that lightning bolt scar. He has glasses. I believe.
He has dark hair.
Yeah, dark hair. So I was about to say, great. Okay, so that's pretty good on appearance. What about personality? What is his personality like? Any ideas on Harry Potter's personality? So what do we mean when we say personality? What kind of things are we talking about?
Nerd. He looks like a nerd.
He looks like a nerd? Oh, not super much, but I guess we can put that in appearance. But let's think about personality, because he's like, when we, for instance, let's say fighting Voldemort. What does that tell us, that he's fighting Voldemort? What does that tell us about his personality?
Brave.
Brave. Okay, very good. So that would be an example of a personality trait. What else? Is he... what are some other personality traits of his?
He's smart.
Fairly smart, definitely. Okay, great. Now, what about strengths? What are his strengths?
Magic.
Magic, that would be an obvious one. So he definitely has that added advantage of being able to do magic. What is another strength? And strengths don't necessarily, if we think about this in the context of fighting Voldemort, well, he has his personal strengths, like the fact that he's able to work magic, and the fact that he is quite brave, but then he also has the added advantage of having some very good friends, so that's definitely a good thing. What about weaknesses? What are some of Harry Potter's weaknesses?
When he thinks about his parents.
Yeah, when he thinks about his parents, so the fact that he's an orphan definitely makes life a little harder. What are some more of his weaknesses?
In the first book, he didn't know what he was until all the letters came flying through the door.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So maybe he has that kind of identity crisis a bit. What about goals? So what is Harry Potter trying to do?
He's trying to
defeat Voldemort.
Exactly, defeat Voldemort. That's the main goal throughout the book. Defeat Voldemort. There are obviously smaller goals along the way, and then you can also put other details over here, but that's pretty good for now. So think about your character. What's their name, age, appearance, personality, strengths, weaknesses, goals? Those are all some good traits you want to look at in your character. So yeah, definitely take notes here. I'll highlight this for you. I would get, oops, so I'm getting here we go. So name, age, appearance, personality, strengths, weaknesses, goals. And you can also put other stuff in there. But so is everyone done writing down the name, age, appearance, personality, strengths, weaknesses, goals part?
No.
Oh, as in you don't have to fill this out for your character right now. You just want to write down these parts.
Just the headers, name, age, that kind of stuff. You're supposed to be taking notes here. It's kind of valuable.
What if you don't know your character's age? Like, it doesn't tell you.
That's a very good point. So if you don't know some of these, you don't necessarily worry about it too much. You want to look at the book, maybe look for clues. So for instance, if the person is going to school, then you would know that they were school age, which means somewhere between whatever age that you would usually start school and the age that you would stop school. So somewhere in between there. What's more, if they have friends who are a certain age, or if they do certain things. So for instance, if they so for instance, how might you know that someone is a teenager?
Yeah, because they might do some weird things.
I love they might do some weird things. Well, you might know that someone's a teenager in a book by either the people that they hang out with. So that might be one clue, or the things that they do. That's a good point. So if you don't necessarily have to pinpoint an age. You don't have to say they're 10, but you could say something like they're probably a teenager, or anywhere between 5 to 10, something like that. You can just pick an age range. And if there are absolutely no clues whatever, then well, I would definitely put kid or adult. That would be, I guess, if you didn't know anything beyond that, you could put kid or adult. Which one? And then appearance, personality, strengths, weaknesses, goals. These ones should usually be pretty evident in the story. You don't have to have a ton of appearance details because that's not the most important thing. But other than that, I would try to fill out strengths and weaknesses with a couple of things because those are pretty important ones. So, moving on. What is the protagonist's name would probably be the first and most important question because you want your readers to know what the name of the protagonist is. It brings them in. It makes them think that they know the book a little more detailed way. What is the protagonist's background? Where does he or she come from? What kind of life has he or she led before the start of the book? Why might you want to ask this question? What is the protagonist's background?
So you can learn more about your characters.
So you could learn more about your characters. Very good. So what is the protagonist's background in your book? Anyone?
They were really poor, and then one of his brother ran for mayor, but he had a big speech balloon, and the big balloon fell off its chains, and it went across the grounds of the fair, and it took off with a statue of who founded the town, and they chased them out into the desert.
Wow, that sounds like it might be a little scary being up in a balloon with that. So yeah, definitely the protagonist's background. For instance, very poor. So definitely think about their economic status. So poor, rich, somewhere in between. That's definitely an important part because that really affects often how the characters act and the way that they make certain choices. So protagonist's background. Also, where does he or she come from? So if it is realistic fiction or if it takes place on Earth, like for instance in Australia, then you would say they're from Australia, they are from a middle-class family. What kind of life has he or she led before the start of the book? So your character, what kind of life do they lead before the start of the book?
They led a life of poverty.
Okay, they led a life of poverty. Very good. You could write something like that. They led a life of poverty before the book. Can you relate to the protagonist? What do I mean when I say can you relate to the protagonist?
Are you almost the same as the protagonist?
Close. It's not necessarily almost the same. Being able to relate to somebody is when, yeah, you do feel kind of close to them, but you also think, oh, wow, I feel sorry for them when they are in a bad position. Or that's so great when they manage to accomplish something they want to. So being able to relate to the protagonist is also being able to understand the protagonist's point of view. So the protagonist is saying, I don't like salami sandwiches. You are able to understand that and say, yeah, I can understand why the protagonist doesn't like salami sandwiches or something like that. So being able to understand the protagonist and their point of view is relating to the protagonist. Do you sympathize with the protagonist? What is sympathizing with the protagonist? Well, sympathizing with the protagonist is, well, kind of what I was talking about earlier, is feeling sad when something bad happens to them or feeling happy when they manage to do something cool. For instance, if you ask yourself, do I sympathize with Harry Potter? That's basically like asking yourself, do I want Harry Potter to defeat Voldemort? Do I feel bad for him when bad things happen to him? So ask yourself, do I sympathize with my protagonist? Do I kind of go, for them when they encounter conflicts or something? So if you sympathize with the protagonist, then you really care about what happens to them. Which I know sounds weird since it's a fictional book and they're not real people, but when you sympathize with someone, you really feel for them. So actually, this is probably a good example. When you sympathize with someone, have you ever read a really, really sad book or watched a really sad movie? Yeah, we probably all have. So maybe some of us have even cried after reading a really sad book. I know I have, if you get that involved. And that means that you're definitely really sympathizing with the protagonist. If someone gets killed in a book, which happens way too often, then, and you feel really sad, that would be sympathizing. So, yeah, just an example. Now, if you sympathize with the protagonist, we have a special word for that. We say that the protagonist is sympathetic. So a sympathetic character is one who the readers sympathize with. And I'm going to get my tongue twisted on this in a few moments. Now, if you do not sympathize with the protagonist at all, you can say that the protagonist is unsympathetic. Now, if you don't sympathize with the protagonist, then you would say, I don't care what happens to them. They can go off and lose their battles and fall off a cliff, whatever. Now, the thing with unsympathetic protagonists is that most books have unsympathetic characters, but if the main character is unsympathetic, if you don't care what happens to the main character, you might have a problem. Why would that be?
Because you wouldn't be able to go along with the book.
You might not be able to go along with the book. Well, most books entice readers in because they make us care about the main character. They make us watch what happens to the main character. Kind of like parents and kids, I guess. Parents care about their kids. They want to make sure nothing bad happens to their kids. If you read a book with a really sympathetic protagonist, then you're kind of like a parent. You care about what happens to that protagonist or friend. And so if you have a book that you're reading and you don't care what happens to the protagonist, it would be like being a stranger. And you also probably wouldn't care about what happens in the rest of the book, since most of these books are built up on the idea that the characters are sympathetic. Now, if the protagonist is entirely unsympathetic, if there's nothing that makes us care for them whatsoever, it may mean that the author is not doing a good job, or that they are making the protagonist unsympathetic on purpose in order to prove a point or make a point. So, now back to writing our paragraph for characters. Oops. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I went ahead of those slides. Let's see. So, what have we decided so far? Is your protagonist sympathetic? What do you think? Do you relate to your protagonist? Are they sympathetic?
I don't relate to my protagonist because he's really afraid of everything, pretty much, and he's really smart, and that's pretty much it.
Are you saying that you're not smart and that's why you don't relate to him?
Pretty much.
Okay, well, well, being afraid of everything, that's really good. So, you could say, you know, my character is kind of afraid of everything, and that's a trait that I don't have, and maybe that I don't particularly like, and so that makes it hard for me to relate to the character. What are some similarities you and the character share? Are there any?
No.
No, not
Not
really.
with my character.
So then you would say, there really aren't that many similarities between me and my character. I don't relate to him, but what about, do you feel sympathetic for him? Like, for instance, if he gets defeated by an antagonist, do you feel sorry for him, kind of?
I felt sorry for him because at the end of the book, his bestest friend got killed, and at the end of the book, they have to bury him, and then at the end of the series, they finally get to go back home.
Okay. What book is this?
This is the one I'm doing is the second one, but there's a series of 9 books, and in the 9th one, his best friend gets killed, and they have to go bury him, and then they get to finally go back home.
Oh, wow. So that sounds pretty sad, definitely. So then, your character, you would say, my character is sympathetic. So I feel sorry for him when bad things happen to him, like having his best friend die. But I don't find him relatable. So he's too different, and I don't really see eye to eye with him on lots of things. Okay? So you ask yourself questions like, is the protagonist sympathetic? Some other questions that you want to ask. So I showed you that character chart that you may want to make. So ask yourself kind of the basic things: name, age, appearance, personality, strengths, weaknesses, goals. Talk about those. Very important. Moving back to where we were. Now, another important part of responding to literature is evaluating whether or not the author does a good job. For example, do the characters seem real? What do you think? Do your characters seem real? Do they seem like people that you might meet on the street?
They're not real because they walk around, they're just little white things. They have big noses, and they don't have any ears, and they don't have a tail, no. And they don't wear any clothes.
Okay.
They're just a little white thing.
Maybe not meet on the street, but do they seem like characters seem real, then I mean, do they seem like, are their personalities ones that you might see in real people?
Kinda. One of them's really jolly and happy. One of them's really grumpy and greedy. And one of them
Is just in love with another girl.
So, yeah, we see people like that. Now, you brought up another important thing, and characters are really complex, so you will want to look at them, but that's an interesting point. You have these characters, grumpy and greedy, jolly and happy. It's kind of the extremes, and if you look at your book, are there any extreme characters? Are there any super evil, super good, or super happy and super sad? If you look at kind of those extremes, it can provide an interesting contrast right there. But when I say, do the characters seem real? If they are people that you might meet walking down the street, or are their personalities not too made up? Are they so personality traits you might see in people that you know?
Yeah, their personalities are like the ones that you would see in normal people, but the way they look, you'd never ever see anybody like it.
Okay, so outside, if you say, well, obviously the characters aren't that real because I wouldn't meet any tailless, earless, white things walking down the street, but, however, their personalities are ones that I see in the people I talk to every day. So, things like being grumpy. You know grumpy people, I'm sure. And you can think about that sort of thing when you ask yourself, do the characters seem real?
You're grumpy.
I'm grumpy? Did you just say that to me?
No, I said she's grumpy.
Okay, well, yeah, don't say that too close to the microphone, else I'll get extraordinarily offended. Now I'm grumpy. Just kidding. Are the characters easy to imagine?
They're easy to imagine in my book because it's a comic book.
So you have that visual right there. What are some other things that you might know to talk about? So are the characters easy to imagine? Does that mean when you read them or look at them, can you see them in your head kind of? Can you imagine them really easily? Any other?
Yeah, because of the description. Author using that.
So you definitely want to write about that description. You would say something along the lines of, the author did a great job with describing the characters very vividly, and so I was able to really see them in my mind. Do you care what happens to the characters?
Yeah.
You do? So then they are what kind of characters?
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic, yay. If you care what happens to them, they're sympathetic, and you would definitely want to talk about that. Does the author do a good job of showing who the characters are? Sharing their personalities with you? What do you think? Well, if an author does a really good job of showing who the characters are, then you might know a lot about the character. You might feel very close to the character, or you might also realize some more of their personality traits or what they like and dislike. Do you have a clear mental image of each character? So sort of similar, can you imagine this character? And those are questions that you may want to answer in your response to literature. Now, unoriginal characters are called stock characters. Stock characters would be the big dumb jock, the beautiful and kind princess, funny and greedy fat kids, snotty English butler, and stupid and mean cheerleader. These are all these stock characters. You see them a lot. They're kind of cliche. They're overused quite a bit. So do you have any stock characters in your book? Well, stock character, if you think, have any of you ever made a drawing with a stencil before?
Yes.
Yeah, so you've taken the stencil and you've drawn on a piece of paper. You take that stencil again and you draw on a piece of paper, and you can make several copies of that stencil. Stock characters are kind of like making drawings with a stencil. They're used a lot again and again and again, and they don't change that much. So you have things like the stupid and mean cheerleader. A lot of books you'll read about high school will have this cheerleader in them who is snotty English butler. Whenever you see an English butler in a story, it tends to be kind of very uptight. So you see these stock characters quite a bit in the stories that you read. It's sort of like naming hobbies with a stencil. Those are those unoriginal characters. Now, are the characters in the book you chose pretty original? So for instance, good writers can create complex and interesting characters that aren't too easy to classify. For instance, Snape in Harry Potter, you're never really sure, is he a villain, is he a good person, is he a villain, is he a good person? It always swings back and forth. It's hard to classify. Are the characters in your book pretty original?
Yeah.
What makes them original?
The fact that they never do good.
Okay. So, now it's your turn. This is what you'll want to get done for our last session, which will be our next one. Our next session, yeah. So take out the response to literature you've been working on, start a new paragraph, and the new paragraph will be about your book's characters. This will be your paragraph about characters. And you want to answer the following questions. What is the protagonist's name? What is the protagonist's background? Do you sympathize with the protagonist? Do the characters seem real? Does the author do a good job showing who the characters are? Are the characters original? So let me circle all this for you. Name, background, sympathize. You can just put sympathize with a question mark. Real, do they seem real? Does the author do a good job showing who the characters are? So you can ask yourself, does the personality come through? Are the characters original? So write down about 5 words. Name, background, sympathize, question mark, real. Does the author do a good job showing who the characters are? So personality, original. Those are the words you can write down and answer those questions. Name is pretty easy. So that's probably the first thing you can start off with. For instance, Harry Potter. What is the protagonist's background? So Harry Potter lives with aunt and uncle. He's an orphan. Do you sympathize with the protagonist? Yes. And you would want to put more than yes in when you'd want to write a full sentence. So for instance, I sympathize with the protagonist because. Do the characters seem real? And why? Does the author do a good job showing who the characters are? And are the characters original? So, have you written down all these?
Yeah. Well, I did.
Well, if you want to, if you haven't finished writing it down by the time we close off, you can always copy off someone who has. So that's a pretty good thing to do. And are there any questions? Is there anything that's not clear or you'd like me to read again? Any questions you have? Okay.
For anyone that doesn't have it, I've got this written down, so I'll give it to you tomorrow.
Great. Thank you very much. And by the way, for those of you, I remembered that I got 2 questions about hockey. So firstly, I remember that Montreal is now my favorite hockey team. And then the second thing is I actually watched my first hockey game on television the other day. I was watching the Stanley Cup final, and it was between Philadelphia and Chicago, I believe. So it was very actually fun to watch. I'm not totally sure. I'm sorry. I was more watching the hockey players than the numbers up on the top, but
2-1.
2-1. Oh wow.
Did you watch it last night, or did you watch it on Saturday?
I watched on Saturday, I think.
Oh, that's
6-5.
For Chicago.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I think hockey would be fun to play, but have any of you played hockey before?
I did.
I see some raised
They
hands.
tried.
They tried.
Played hockey before.
Oh yes.
Okay, yeah.
I go all kinds of places for hockey.
Yeah.
That's cool. Great. Actually, it was
I'm a goalie.
Oh, you are? You're the person who like stands right by that net and keeps it.
Yeah.
Okay, because I hadn't actually understood the intricacies of hockey before I watched the game, and I was like, oh, okay, so that's where the people go and use their sticks and kick around the ball. Okay, yeah, so I definitely understand it a lot better now. Actually, I remember thinking, how, because I saw like, I don't know, 10 people smash up right against a wall, and I thought, that must hurt. And then I see someone who has like a bleeding lip, and so I realized that was probably what happens when you get smashed up against a wall.
Yeah, that happens every game.